So you might get the picture here. Their walk to Emmaus was not a stroll of life and hope, unlike that lovely German painting. It wasn't an inviting stroll. It was the walk no one wants to make. It was the walk of losers, the hopeless, the beat down, and the discouraged. It was the walk of the heartbroken and the worn out. We've all had those Monday morning experiences, haven't we? The day after. The day after when we have lost hope and the world has the audacity to keep carrying on as it did before. The day that we realize that although our world has ended, the earth is just going to keep spinning on its axis. The day after the news, after the funeral, after the wedding, after the diagnosis. And we have all had that experience of walking the road to Emmaus, which isn't so much a walk to somewhere as a walk away from something. It's the road that we walk to escape the broken heart or the hopeless situation. It's the road we walk to get as far away from the thing that we'd hoped for as we can. Sometimes the road to Emmaus is even a walk away from faith as we knew it. It's a walk away from the ways we used to think or believe, or even the institutions or the temples that we put our faith in. It's easy to think that because we worship a resurrected Jesus, that means there are no longer any Mondays, there are no longer any walks on the Emmaus Road. But that's one of the beautiful things about this story. It reminds us that it is in these things, in these ordinary, heartbreaking, disappointing circumstances of life, that the resurrected Jesus walks alongside of us. And when Jesus shows up in this story, in this lovely twist of irony and humor, but also compassion, he doesn't just dive in and try to change things for the followers. He says to them, "What things? What things?" He gives them room to tell the story of their disappointment and their grief, their Monday story, their story of loss of hope. Jesus doesn't skip over it. He doesn't shoosh them. He doesn't rescue them or offer them platitudes. He simply listens. Jesus shows up in the middle of this journey away from hope, and in his listening, he begins to transform the story of these followers, the story that these followers are telling themselves. And I wonder what might need to be reinterpreted in our lives or in our world, where we might be getting it wrong. What perspective might we be missing that keeps things from clicking into place? What detail might we be missing or getting wrong? What interpretation of the events might keep us from seeing what is true? One thing that the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus reveals about the lives of followers of Jesus is that God does not rescue us from suffering. God redeems the suffering. Things fall apart. Hopes die. We all have experiences of walking the road to Emmaus, and we, like Cleopas, that disciple of Jesus, often can only see things through the lens of our disappointment. We had hoped. We had hoped it would be different. We had hoped we would be rescued, but that didn't happen, and now there is no hope. But Jesus can reframe these stories. And how do we let Jesus do this? Because when we can't see what we can't see, we can't see it. Do you get my drift? Until someone reframed that interaction with the doctor, I couldn't conceive that he could have meant anything other than what I thought he meant. Well, there's no formula for these things, but there are ways that this story sort of invites us to reframe or reimagine our disillusionment and our disappointment. Number one, tell your story. Tell your story in the right community. It says in this passage that as these followers walked along, they discussed these things. But the word used for discussed here is inquired, examined. They were wrestling with this story, trying to put the pieces together. They were trying to make sense of it. And when Jesus shows up, he gives them space to tell their story. Telling our stories is a way that we integrate them, that we make sense of them, that we make meaning out of them. Secondly, don't just tell your story to a community, tell your story to Jesus in prayer. And then take time to listen, to hear what Jesus might be saying back to you about your story and your interpretation of it. It was only in telling the story of that interaction with the doctor that I began to see that conversation differently. And that has happened so many times for me in my life in other ways. When I've told my whole sad tale to a friend or a counselor or even to Jesus, and they've absorbed it all, they've heard it all, and then they reframe it completely for me. Oh, I see God there. I think you got that part wrong. I think there is still hope. It's maybe just in a different place than where you're looking. Finally, this story reminds us to find new perspective by looking at the story of God as told in the scriptures. And by this, I don't mean that we go to our index and look up, like difficult parenting, what do they call it? Highly spirited child. And then we go and find the solution in our Bible on page 52. But rather that we reorient our lives, our actions, and our hearts to a God who tells the story that he works through suffering, through pain, and through death to bring redemption. We learn how to live well in disappointment. We learn to trust when things feel hopeless. We learn how to imagine new life and new hope when all we can see is death. The scriptures help us wait well because they remind us that we are living in the middle of a story, and the story is not over. And I wonder if over these 70 days of Easter, a little bit like an Easter egg hunt, we could do our own version of hunting the good stuff. It's this time of year when we're invited for 70 days to hunt Jesus, to notice Jesus showing up, surprising us with his new life. I wonder if hunting for the good stuff might be a way not to paper over the difficulties of our lives, but allow God or participate with God to help open our eyes to the ways that Jesus is already present to us, has always been there, even on those long Monday walks to Emmaus.